The morning of the funeral was heavy with grief, the sky a dull gray as if the world itself mourned the loss of a child too young to die. Clara stood at the entrance of the small chapel, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. Just days ago, her 8-year-old son, Ethan, had been taken from her. A tragic accident, they said. A hit and run. No witnesses, no justice. The police had assured her the driver would be found, but Clara didn't care about that now. All she wanted was to see her boy one last time, to whisper her love into his cold, still ears before they buried him forever. The chapel was filled with somber faces, family, friends, neighbors, all offering quiet condolences she couldn't bring herself to hear. Her husband, Daniel, stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, but his touch felt distant, as if he too had already begun to let go. The funeral director, a tall man with a practiced look of sympathy, gestured for them to approach the open casket. Clara's legs moved on their own, her heart pounding as she neared the small white coffin. Then she saw him. At first, it was just the shock of seeing Ethan so still, so pale, his usual bright smile replaced by an unnatural stillness. But as she leaned closer, her fingers brushing his cheek, something felt wrong. The shape of his nose was slightly different, the curve of his brow just a little too sharp. A tiny scar she didn't recognize marred his temple. Her breath hitched. "This isn't Ethan," she whispered. The room seemed to freeze. Daniel frowned, leaning in. "What?" Clara's voice rose, trembling but firm. "This isn't our son." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The funeral director rushed forward, his face paling. "Ma'am, I assure you there's no mistake." But Clara wasn't listening. Her hands shook as she touched the boy's face again, her mind screaming that this was wrong. All wrong. The child in the coffin looked almost identical to Ethan, but he wasn't hers. And if this wasn't her son, then where was Ethan? The funeral director's reassurances turned into frantic whispers as Clara's cries grew louder, her fingers clutching the edge of the coffin like she might collapse if she let go. The room erupted into chaos. Some guests gasped, others murmured in disbelief, while a few stepped forward, peering into the casket as if they could somehow confirm or deny what Clara already knew in her bones. Daniel's face twisted in confusion, his hands gripping her shoulders as he tried to steady her, but she jerked away, her mind racing. This wasn't grief playing tricks on her. This wasn't denial. The boy, lying there, dressed in Ethan's favorite blue suit, was a stranger. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If this wasn't Ethan, then her son wasn't dead. But where was he? Who would do this? The funeral director, now sweating, pulled Clara aside, his voice low and urgent, insisting there had been a terrible mix-up at the morgue. A paperwork error, something explainable. But Clara wasn't listening. Her thoughts spiraled. Had someone taken her son? Had the accident even been real? The police report, the closed casket at the wake, the rushed burial arrangements. Suddenly, every detail felt suspicious. She turned to Daniel, her voice shaking, but fierce. "We need to call the police, now." But as she said it, she noticed the way his jaw tightened, the hesitation in his eyes. Why wasn't he as horrified as she was? Why wasn't he demanding answers? Before she could question him, a loud crash echoed from the back of the chapel. A mourner had knocked over a vase, the sound shattering the tension like glass. In the commotion, Clara's eyes locked onto a man she didn't recognize, standing near the exit, his gaze fixed on her. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even pretending to mourn. And the moment their eyes met, he turned and walked out. Clara's heart pounded. Was he watching her? Did he know something? Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd, ignoring Daniel's calls, and ran after the stranger, her funeral heels clicking against the pavement as she burst into the cold morning air. But the man was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there. The street was empty, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Clara stood there, breathless, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. If this was a mistake, it was a monstrous one. But if it wasn't a mistake, then someone had gone to great lengths to make her believe her son was dead, and that meant Ethan was still alive. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed voices, the officers' faces, a mix of skepticism and forced patience as Clara slammed her hands on the front desk, demanding someone, anyone, listen to her. The corpse wasn't Ethan. The funeral home had lied. Her son was missing, not dead. The words tumbled out in a frantic rush, her voice cracking under the weight of a truth no one else seemed to believe. The officer at the desk, a weary-looking man with thinning hair, sighed and exchanged a glance with his colleague before asking Clara to sit down, his tone dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, grief does strange things to the mind," he said, sliding a box of tissues toward her as if her panic could be wiped away like tears. But Clara wasn't grieving. She was furious. She dug into her purse and pulled out a photo of Ethan, his school picture from just a month ago, his smile wide and bright, a faint gap where he'd lost a tooth. "Look at his face," she insisted, thrusting the photo forward. "The boy in that coffin isn't him. The nose is different. The scar isn't his. My son doesn't have a scar there." The officers hesitated, flipping through the case file, murmuring about clerical errors, but Clara could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't want to reopen the investigation. It was easier to call her hysterical, to dismiss her as a mother unable to accept her child's death. But then Daniel walked in, his face pale, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and the way he avoided her gaze sent a chill down her spine. "Clara, maybe we should just go home," he said quietly, his voice strained. She stared at him, her stomach twisting. Why wasn't he fighting with her? Why wasn't he demanding answers? Before she could confront him, a detective, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward, introducing herself as Detective Reyes. She took the photo from Clara's hands, studied it, then looked up with a frown. "I'll need to see the body," she said, and those words, simple as they were, felt like the first crack in the wall of lies Clara had been screaming at. As they left the station, Clara caught Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "You knew," she whispered, her voice trembling with betrayal. He flinched, his eyes darting away, and in that moment, she understood. He had been hiding something. But before she could demand the truth, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single text. "Stop asking questions if you want to see your son alive." The screen blurred as tears filled her eyes, but beneath the fear, a fire ignited. They had Ethan, and she would burn the world down to get him back. The text message burned in Clara's mind like a brand, each word a terrifying confirmation that Ethan was alive and in danger. Her hands shook as she gripped the phone, her mind racing through every possible scenario. Who had sent this? Where? Was her son? Why had someone gone through the elaborate charade of faking his death? The questions swirled like a storm, but one thing was clear. This was no accident, no bureaucratic mix-up. This was deliberate. And as she stood there in the cold, sterile light of the police station parking lot, the weight of Daniel's silence pressed down on her like a physical force. She turned to him, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "You knew," she repeated, her eyes searching his face for any flicker of guilt, any sign of the man she'd loved and trusted. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his shoulders slumping as if the truth was too heavy to hold. "Clara, it's not what you think," he began, but the feeble deflection was enough to shatter whatever fragile hope she'd clung to. Behind them, Detective Reyes cleared her throat, her sharp gaze darting between them, sensing the tension. "We need to move quickly," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If your son is alive, every second counts." The detective's urgency snapped Clara back into focus, pushing aside the heartbreak threatening to consume her. There would be time for answers later, time to confront Daniel, to unravel whatever secrets he'd been keeping. But now, Ethan needed her. The detective ushered them into her car, the engine roaring to life as she sped toward the morgue, her questions rapid and precise. Had Ethan been acting strangely before the accident? Had Clara noticed anyone watching him? Did they have any enemies? Clara's mind raced, sifting through memories. Ethan's laughter as he played in the yard, his small hand in hers as they walked to school, the way he'd hugged her extra tight the night before the accident. Had that been a warning? A subconscious goodbye? The morgue loomed ahead, a grim, unfeeling building that held the key to the nightmare. As they stepped inside, the sterile smell of antiseptic and death filled Clara's nostrils, making her stomach churn. The attendant, a young man with tired eyes, led them to the cold room where the body, the stranger, lay waiting. Detective Reyes pulled back the sheet, and Clara forced herself to look, to study the face that wasn't her son's. Up close, the differences were even more obvious. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyebrows. This child was similar, but he wasn't Ethan. "Who is he?" Clara whispered, her voice breaking. The detective's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out." She turned to the attendant. "I need full dental records, fingerprints, anything that can ID this boy." The attendant nodded, hurrying off, but Clara's attention was drawn to something else. A faint mark on the boy's wrist, almost hidden beneath the cuff of his sleeve. A symbol, small and precise, like a tattoo or a brand. A circle with a line through it. Her breath caught. She'd seen that mark before, years ago in a news article about a missing child case, one that had never been solved. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about Ethan. This was bigger, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Clara's fingers trembled as she reached out, brushing the cold skin of the unknown boy's wrist, her mind reeling at the familiar symbol. A circle with a slash through it, so small it could have been missed if not for the way the fluorescent light caught the raised edges of the mark. The moment her fingertips touched it, a flood of fragmented memories rushed back. Grainy newspaper photos, late-night documentaries about missing children, whispered rumors of a shadowy organization that operated in the darkest corners of the city. She had dismissed them as conspiracy theories back then, the kind of sensational stories people shared to feel a thrill of fear before going about their safe, ordinary lives. But now, faced with this boy's body, the symbol stared back at her like a taunt. A breadcrumb left behind by someone who never thought she'd dare to follow it. Detective Reyes noticed her fixation and leaned in, her voice sharp with urgency. "You recognize this?" Clara nodded, her throat tight, struggling to put the pieces into words. I think it's connected to other missing kids. Years ago, there were reports, a pattern. Children who vanished without a trace, and some of them had this mark. The detective's expression hardened, and she pulled out her phone, snapping a photo of the symbol before barking orders at the morgue attendant to expedite the autopsy and cross-reference the mark with any unsolved cases. Meanwhile, Daniel stood frozen near the doorway, his face ashen, his hands clenched at his sides as if he were fighting the urge to bolt. Clara turned to him, her voice a raw whisper. "You knew about this, didn't you?" The accusation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Daniel's breath hitched, and for a moment she thought he might finally break, might tell her the truth. But then his phone buzzed, the sound jarring in the sterile silence, and when he looked at the screen, his entire body went rigid. Without a word, he turned and walked out, leaving Clara staring after him, her heart pounding with betrayal and dread. Detective Reyes grabbed her arm, pulling her attention back. "We don't have time for this. If your husband's involved, we'll deal with him later. Right now, we need to figure out who this boy is and why someone wanted you to believe he was Ethan." She motioned to the body. This wasn't just a mix-up. This was staged. And if they went to this much trouble, it means your son is valuable to them. Clara's knees nearly buckled at the thought. Ethan, alive but trapped somewhere, terrified and alone. She forced herself to breathe, to focus. If this symbol was the key, then she would follow it straight into the heart of whatever nightmare had taken her child. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the morgue's windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the city, Ethan was waiting, and Clara would tear apart every shadow until she found him. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof of Detective Reyes's car as they sped through the slick streets, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her body tense, her mind spinning with fragmented thoughts. The symbol on the dead boy's wrist, Daniel's sudden departure, the chilling text message warning her to stop asking questions. Every second that passed felt like a theft, another moment stolen from Ethan's life, and the weight of helplessness threatened to crush her. Detective Reyes gripped the steering wheel tighter, her jaw set as she navigated the traffic, her phone buzzing incessantly with updates from the precinct. "We've got a hit on that symbol," she said abruptly, her voice cutting through the static of the rain. "It's linked to a series of cold cases, missing children spanning back a decade, all from this area, all unsolved. But here's the kicker. The files were sealed. Someone didn't want these cases connected." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Sealed by who?" Reyes shot her a grim look. "Higher-ups. People with power. This goes deeper than I thought." The car swerved into the precinct parking lot, tires screeching against the wet pavement, and Clara barely waited for it to stop before she was out the door, sprinting through the rain toward the building, her clothes clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. Inside, the precinct was a hive of activity, officers scrambling, voices raised in urgency. Reyes grabbed a folder from a detective at the door and thrust it into Clara's hands. "Look familiar?" Clara's heart stopped. Inside were photos, dozens of them, each showing a child with the same symbol burned into their wrist. And at the bottom of the pile, a grainy surveillance still that made her legs give out. Ethan, alive, his face pale with fear, being led into a black van by a figure in a hood. The timestamp was from yesterday. "He's alive," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "He's alive, and they have him." Reyes nodded, her expression fierce. "We're going to find him. But Clara, you need to prepare yourself. The people behind this, they don't play by the rules. If they went to the trouble of faking Ethan's death, it's because he's important to them for some reason, and they won't give him up without a fight." Clara stared at the photo, her fingers trembling as she traced Ethan's face. She didn't care about the danger. She didn't care about the rules. All that mattered was getting her son back. Somewhere, in the city, he was waiting for her, and she would move heaven and earth to bring him home. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city loomed like a tomb in the storm, its broken windows staring down at Clara like hollow eyes as she crouched behind a rusted delivery truck, her body trembling with a mix of adrenaline and terror. Detective Reyes had wanted to wait for backup, but Clara couldn't. Not when the anonymous tip had led them here, not when the grainy photo of Ethan being forced into that van had been time-stamped just hours ago. The rain had turned the ground to mud, seeping into her shoes as she crept forward, every sense on high alert, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. The warehouse door was slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling out, and as Clara slipped inside, the smell of damp concrete and motor oil filled her nose, mingling with something darker. Fear, desperation, the metallic tang of blood. The space was cavernous, cluttered with broken machinery and stacks of rotting crates, shadows stretching and twisting in the flickering light of a single, swaying bulb. And then she heard it. A whimper so faint it might have been the wind, but Clara knew. It was Ethan. She moved without thinking, darting between the crates, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps until she saw him. Her son, curled in the corner of a makeshift cage, his small frame shivering, his face streaked with dirt and tears. The sight of him alive after days of believing him dead nearly brought her to her knees. But before she could rush forward, a hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her back into the shadows. She thrashed, panic surging, until she recognized Reyes's voice in her ear. "Wait!" the detective hissed. "It's a trap." And then Clara saw them, figures emerging from the darkness, their faces obscured by masks, their movements precise, practiced. One of them stepped forward holding a syringe, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "Time to go, kid," he muttered, reaching for the cage. Clara didn't hesitate. She lunged, screaming Ethan's name, her voice echoing through the warehouse like a gunshot. The masked men whirled, shock registering in their eyes. They hadn't expected her. Chaos erupted. Reyes tackled one of the men to the ground, gunfire ringing out as police sirens wailed in the distance, backup finally arriving. Clara didn't care about any of it. She sprinted to the cage, her fingers fumbling with the lock until it gave him way. And then Ethan was in her arms, sobbing, clinging to her as if he'd never let go. "I knew you'd come," he whispered, his voice small and broken. Clara held him tighter, her tears mixing with the rain on his hair. She didn't know who these men were or why they'd taken him, and right now it didn't matter. All that mattered was this: her son was alive, and no one would ever take him from her again.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.